I'm a fan of hats and hat day, although, as you can tell, I'm not the person that should be wearing a hat on a regular basis. This is, I believe, my daughter's hat. She looks wonderful in hats. My wife looks amazing in hats. My grandmother and my aunts all looked wonderful in hats, and that was one of the traditions in my family growing up, maybe yours as well. So this is a nod and a thanks to all the people who kind of served as mothers in our lives, and for your benefit and mine, I am not going to wear this hat while I preach. I want us to continue this morning in our sermon series, our post-Easter sermon series that we have entitled Emerging as Butterflies. Now, the reason behind that is that the notion of Easter, the metaphor of Easter, is that we come to life. We are new, but we are reborn in a new way, the same way that a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis and emerges as a butterfly, has wings to spread. And yet, many of us who have found ourselves coming out of these 13 months of quarantine are trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. Now, honestly, for a number of us, we have had a level of rest and reflection and renewal that we've never known before in our lives. It has been a wonderful pause and an opportunity, besides all the hardship and the difficulty and the tragedy, to kind of regroup, to catch our breath, a forced hiatus, if you will. But for others of us, it has not been a rest. In fact, it's been the opposite. It wasn't a slowdown. It was, in a way, a new demand, a new level of work that never stopped. It was a new level of transition and transformation in terms of how we do our work and what we do for, and honestly, for all parents, but typically it tends to fall on the shoulders of mothers. It was not only doing your work, but it was also having your kids with you underfoot every day, 24/7, and then on top of that, being asked to be the primary or secondary educator for those same children. It has been a lot. It has been exhausting. And so there's a number of us that come out of this forced pause, this time of quarantine, more exhausted and tired and empty than we have been in quite some time. And the thing is, not only has this been challenging for us within our homes and our families, it seems like if and when you do take the time or have the opportunity to get your head above water and look out and see what's happening in the rest of society and the world, we are so quickly overwhelmed by the needs and all the things that it feels like we could or should be doing to be a part of the answer to the problems that we see all around us. So that's why this morning we are talking about the power of intentional resting, intentionally stepping back and resting and reflecting in a way that helps us to be better butterflies, be the Easter people that we want to be and we know that God would have us be as well. Our scripture this morning is one that talks explicitly about this need for us to step back, to step away, and to do that intentionally. Jesus calls his disciples to step away with him. He invites them because they're tired. They have been without food. They've been very busy. And he says, you need to come with me. Step away with me. Let's spend some time together until, of course, the crowds catch up with them and crash their retreat. And then the words of Jesus in the text here, I think, are both frustrating and confounding. But then as you stick with the text, I think also revelatory and enlightening. So what I would like to do is just to share, I'm going to share my screen here real quick, and I want to look at this text together. So here's our text. It comes from Mark chapter 6. And the interesting thing to note about this text of Jesus stepping away with his disciples is that it is found in all four of our Gospels, and there's not a lot of stories that are found that way. So I think there's a special weight and message to this. Now, just a little bit of context. This was the first time that Jesus had sent his disciples out into the world, and he sent them out in pairs to do miraculous things, and they healed the sick, and they preached the forgiveness that is people's through Jesus Christ. And then they had just come back together, and Jesus could tell they were tired and exhausted. They'd been out and about for quite some time. So here we go, Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. So they're pretty excited. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, Jesus said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Can you relate to this? When you're about to step away, all of a sudden the world catches up with you. When Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them. I'm going to pause there for a second. Can you imagine what was going on in the disciples' hearts and minds at this point? Right? Jesus had just recognized, you're exhausted, let's get away, let's do this thing. We get in a boat, we intentionally leave the crowds, and then the crowds catch up to you, and instead of Jesus saying, hey folks, actually we're not going to tell you where we're going next, I got to get away with my disciples. Instead, Jesus leans into the chaos, leans into the needs, right, and begins teaching them. He has compassion on these sheep. And so the disciples are kind of sitting back. Their stomachs are grumbling, trying to figure out how long this is going to be. And by this time, it gets late in the day, and I can just imagine his disciples kind of trying to get Jesus' attention, tapping their watches a little bit. You know, it's like, this has been great, but this is a remote place. It's already very late. Why don't you send the people away now? We're being very selfless at this. We want to send them to the surrounding countryside and villages by themselves so they can get something to eat, because they're probably starving like we are. But Jesus, again, I'm sure frustrating the heck out of them, answers, you give them something to eat. But the disciples said to him, now here is where I think their frustration and their anger starts to bubble through. Like, are you kidding me? You want us to give you something to eat. So you want us to go off and buy bread worth 8 months' pay and give it to them to eat. That's what you want us to do right now? You want us to go spend 8 months' pay, which we don't have, to feed all of these people. Is that right? So following their frustration, their snitty answer, Jesus responds to them. And this is where you realize Jesus kind of was teaching them all along, even through this chaos. And Jesus says to them, how much bread do you have? Take a look. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This last line there, how much bread do you have? Take a look. I think is kind of the synopsis, the main point of this whole dialogue. You see, Jesus doesn't say, no, actually it's only going to be 6 months, but you can, I know there's a restaurant over here and there's a grocery store down the street. He says, he doesn't even address their question, right? I'm not asking you, he says. I'm not asking you to go off and buy things. I didn't say, how much money do you have? I said, we need to feed these people. And I didn't even say that you're going to feed them. And so the question then Jesus asked them after they're exhausted, they're hungry, and they say, what do you think we're going to do? How do we solve this problem? What do you want us to do? Run off and spend 8 months' wages? Jesus says, just, what have you got? Take a look. The message, I think, that Jesus is speaking to his disciples, because he knows he's going to leave them eventually, and they will be dealing with this day in and day out. They need to know what they have, who they are, what resources they can draw from. The three takeaways that I get from this passage are, one, that there will always be overwhelming need in the world. There will always be crowds that catch up to you, and Jesus will always have compassion on everyone. Jesus will always respond to the needs of everyone. That's lesson one. Lesson two is really important for all of us. We are not Jesus. We're not called to be Jesus. If we start thinking about ourselves like we are Jesus, and we can meet the needs of everybody, and we can be moved by our compassion to try to engage in and solve every problem, we're the ones who have the problem. There will always be overwhelming need in the world. Jesus will always respond with, and we are not Jesus. And so what is important is for us to know who we are. and what we have in our cupboards. And if it's just a couple loaves of bread and a piece of fish, we just say, this is what we got, Jesus. And guess what? Jesus does miraculous and beautiful things with it. And who gets the praise and who gets the glory? God. And we thank God. Right, if I have to run out and I've got to spend 8 months' wages and I do this and that and I design the whole thing and I put out the spread and I'm exhausted, the praise goes right here. I mean, I did it, right? I mean, I'm not going to take maybe credit for it. See, God's question to us is, what's in your pantry? That's all I'm asking. What do you got? We need to know what we got, who we are, what our gifts are, and not try to give from something we don't have, not try to be somebody we aren't. If we're constantly responding to the needs in our lives and the lives of others with anxiety and lists and this idea that we've got to go out and somehow and solve it all, we are giving from a place of scarcity and anxiety, and it will show. But if we can give from a place of knowing who we are, and what we have to give, then that will be giving from a place of abundance and thanksgiving and being amazed at what God does with the simple things we have in our lives. One of the things that our church tries to do writ large is model healthy and sustainable habits. And so our denomination has policy that depending on what congregation you're in, somewhere between 5 and 7 years, pastors are asked basically to take a 3-month sabbatical, to get away, to rest and relax. 5 years ago, you were very, very gracious and allowed me to step away for a summer for 3 months. And I want to tell you something now that I haven't told you till this point, is that 5 years ago when that happened to me, I was at a point in my career, psychologically, spiritually, where I didn't know if this is exactly what I wanted to do for the next 15, 20 years. I was in my mid-late 40s. I was tired. I was exhausted. And one of the things I was going to do is figure out, am I coming back to ministry for the long time? And through the course of that time, for the course of those 3 months, I met with various mentors and friends of mine across the country, asked them what my gifts were. I was able to rest and relax, reconnect with Jesus in ways that were very meaningful. I learned new ways to pray. And what I discovered was I actually love being a pastor. It's just all the things that I had taken onto my plate and the things that I was trying to do, I needed to figure out how to have other folks do those for me so I could do the things that God had called me to do so that I could give out of my pantry. That 5 years ago, my ministry was transformed. My life was transformed because of that time of rest. The reason I was able to do that is because, second, you had just called a fantastic associate pastor who had been here for a good solid 9 months when I said to the personnel committee, she is great, she is competent, and I think I can take my first sabbatical of my life. I hadn't been able to take a sabbatical my first 2 calls. And so Kristin Riegel kind of took the helm. We are now 6 years into Kristin's tenure here, and it is now her opportunity, well-earned opportunity to take her sabbatical. And so I thought it would be good for us this morning to take a minute and have a little bit of a conversation. Ask Kristin what she's up to and what she hopes to learn and what she has learned along the way about why it is so important for us to step away, to reflect, to check out what's in our cupboards, reconnect with Jesus. So, here we go. Hi, Kristin. How are you? Good. So, Kristin, as you read through, so Kristin and I took a look at this passage together. As you read through this, and we talked a little bit about it, what stuck out to you from this text of Jesus and his disciples, and how did it relate to the thinking you'd already been doing? I mean, you put in your proposal for this sabbatical about, almost 6 months ago. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was really interesting reading this passage. The first thing that stood out to me is that the disciples were so busy they didn't have time to eat. And all I could think of is, oh my gosh, I've been there. I mean, there have been times where I am running from meeting to meeting or commitment to commitment, and my body is saying, I'm hungry. Like, you need to feed me, you need to stop and rest. And I just power through. And I think I'm probably not the only one. In the United States, we tend to idolize being productive and busy. And I think part of that is because we often equate our self-worth with the work that we do. And in this twisted equation, if we are not being busy, if we are not being productive, if we are not performing, then who are we? What are we? What value do we have?
Well, and it's almost like, in a way, we do
Yeah.
it very subtly, but we brag about how busy we are because that really kind of shows our value. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
kind of twisted that system is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the deeper question of, when you stop, is this question of, am I enough? If I stop doing these things, if I'm not producing, if I am just resting and being, am I enough for the people in my life, for God, for having space on this planet? And I think that's a hard question to sit with. And what I hear the disciples doing, it's really interesting. So they're so hungry and they've been so busy and they don't have time to eat. And then this feeds right into the feeding of the 5,000, which Paul read the first part of. And so, again, they've been bombarded by these crowds. They're off to rest. And all these people are hungry. And when Jesus says, you give them something to eat, and they are exhausted, and as Paul said, snooty, what I hear is not a lack of faith.
Right.
I don't hear callousness in their voice. What I hear them saying is, I am hangry, and I am running on empty, and I have nothing left to give.
Do you guys know what hangry means? It's a fantastic word if you don't, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a piece of it, right? And so I think when we're not taking that time to sit and renew ourselves, to see what's in our cupboard, right, we're not able to give to others. It affects our relationship with God. It affects our relationship with ourselves. And it affects our ability to be in relationship with others. One of the things that I've really appreciated in preparing for this sabbatical is it's not self-care. It's not just this idea of, what makes me feel good, and I'm going to get a pedicure and a manicure. Sabbatical is relational. This rest is relational. It's about reconnecting with God, with yourself, and so that you can be in relationship with others in ways that are transformative, that are life-giving, that are compassionate. And so I am incredibly grateful to Second for this opportunity to step away and really build into my life ways to reconnect with God, with others, and with myself.
And the other part of it, and I don't mean to tie this back
Yeah.
into productivity, but
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, when you do step away and you take a look at your cupboard and who you are and whether you're using your resources wisely or trying to be something you shouldn't be, and you get that rest, it actually makes you so much more productive. I felt like I was more creative.
Yeah.
I had more kind of to draw from. And so it's interesting that, and it's counterintuitive in a society like ours that we think, if you step away, you're lazy or you're not as productive. You actually are much more productive in the long run if you have these kind of forced pauses. So it actually makes you more creative, more dynamic, and a better servant leader.
Yeah, so a little bit of what I'm going to do on my sabbatical, there's really kind of three things that I'm hoping to do. The first of which is to rest. The second is to connect and spend time with the people that I love. And the third thing that I'm going to do is some discernment. Kind of like Paul was saying, for me, rest looks different for each person. And Sabbath in the Old Testament is really about ceasing. It's about stopping. But for me, I'm someone who has trouble kind of just sitting still or laying on my couch. And so rest for me often looks like doing yoga and meditation, doing a lot of creative endeavors, and also spending a lot of time hiking and outdoors in nature. So for me, it is ceasing from consumerism. It's ceasing from checking email. It is ceasing from, even doing the dishes. And it is really finding a way to be present. I was in a women's Bible study this morning, and Leslie Anderson mentioned that she wants to savor life. And I think the Sabbath is about savoring those moments, ceasing and savoring. And so on my sabbatical, I'm going to spend time resting, including by doing a yoga teacher training. So I'll be able to incorporate yoga and embodiment into my ministry here at Second. But I'm really excited to have that space to cease and to savor. The second thing that I'm going to do is spend time reconnecting with God and with friends and family. One of the first things I was told when I went into ministry is that ministry is relational. And I think it's not just ministry, right? Like, we are relational creatures. We're connectional. And what I have realized is that I do not do ministry alone. Even when I'm up here preaching on a Sunday morning, I have already read that sermon to my parents who've listened to it 3 times. I have a colleague who's in Minnesota who I've read it to. I have all of these people in my life who are really just being there as support. And so during this time away, I want to reconnect with them, to have that space to just sit, to be, to listen, to reflect, and to be present to one another. And so that's the reconnection part. And then the third thing I want to do is spend some time discerning and engaging in reflection about the last 6 years and the ministry we've shared together, and discerning, what is God calling me to do? Who is God calling me to be in the year ahead? And so I'll be meeting with a spiritual director during that time. A spiritual director is someone who accompanies you and kind of sits with you as you have questions that are bubbling to the surface. I don't know about all of you, but I often have the questions of, what am I going to eat for dinner, and what am I going to do next week, and how am I going to make time for things? But then there are all these other questions that kind of just bubble beneath the surface, these deeper questions. And so during this time, allowing for those to come to the surface and really to sit with them, to sit with questions and to hear where God may be speaking. So.
Fantastic. So the benefit of, and the reason that we are both thankful to be Presbyterian pastors is that we have this opportunity every whatever it is, 5, 6, 7 years. As you have been preparing for this time and thinking about this, what would be, because not everybody here is going to have the opportunity to do something like this, what would be some kind of practical takeaways that folks could grab, some nuggets they could take that they could apply to their day, their week going forward?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that I often think, at least for myself, about rest as something that you get when you cross the finish line, right? When you have finished your list of things to do, when you have, gotten all the, chores done around the house. But what we see in the Bible is that rest isn't a reward, it's a commandment. God calls us to rest as part of who we are, it's part of what's being faithful. And so I would encourage you to find ways to make rest part of your daily or weekly rhythm. You may not be able to take 24 hours and cease checking email or doing chores, but taking an hour or two or even, 5 minutes to pause and to be present. And again, the 3 things I'm going to do are rest, spend time with the people I love, and engage in reflection. And so if any of those speak to you, find ways that you can rest. Find ways to spend time with the people you love, or spend time really taking that moment to reflect and to discern and say, God, what are you asking? Who are you calling me to be? And to sit with that. And if you can, bring others into that conversation so you can discern together.
Yeah.
So.
Like I said, in my first 2 calls, I was literally at the 6-year period, and something happened. There was one church, there was kind of a split, something else, and I felt it just wasn't the time. And I think I told you earlier, there's never a good time. And if you wait for a good time to do these things, you're going to be waiting forever. And so one of the things I had to learn early on in my ministry was to not wait for the 3 months or even the week off or whatever. But someone taught me early on, happened to be someone who was trained in Jesuit spirituality, about this thing called the examen. You guys have heard of the examen? And it's basically, it's the practice of before you go to bed at night, you just take a moment, and you've got some of us have journals by your bed, and you literally just go over to the extent that you can, day by day, and you kind of invite God to go on a journey with you, and you just look through your day, and you kind of remember everything that you did, and what you're supposed to kind of call to mind is, where did I sense that I could really kind of sense the presence of God? And where was I kind of at my best? And just to give thanks for that and to celebrate. But then also to note, where was the life just kind of getting sucked out of me? Or where was I just existing and not, being maybe helpful to myself or others? And just make note of that. You don't shame yourself. It's just noting that. And then I found a little bit later on, actually, coming out of my sabbatical here, is that the Jesuits don't just practice that once a day, they do that twice a day. So you've got your morning matins, you have your time with Christ in the morning, but then halfway through the day, you schedule it. That's the other thing I found. Those of you who use calendars, if I put it on the calendar, it happens. If you don't put it on the calendar, it doesn't. And if you put it on the calendar as free time, inevitably, someone's going to reach out to me. John Miller sends me a text or something, says, hey, can we get together? And I'll look and I'll say, oh yeah, I've got some free time on Friday. You don't put it as free time. You say, I'm completely committed for this, whatever it is, block of time. And for my examens, it's literally no more than 5 or 10 minutes. But I'll find time right before or after lunch, and I sit and I just find a quiet place and I just think back over my morning, and I give thanks for the places where I recognize God, and I recognize where maybe I haven't been at my best, and try to just learn from that. So I do that twice a day, and that was a way for me to kind of insert some Sabbath into my crazy regular schedule, especially when I had 3 little kids at home and everything. But are there little things that you've learned like that you can do before you get a larger time away?
Yeah, I think for me, a big piece of it, like I've already mentioned, is yoga or being able to be outside and to move. I think with the beautiful weather that we've had, taking those times, even if it's a 15-minute walk, and I will often have headphones in and listen to a podcast, but usually for about the last 2 blocks, I will take them out. And you can do a sensory prayer where you're saying, what do I see right now? What do I hear right now? What do I smell right now? I don't know if you all have smelled the lilacs that are out that are just so beautiful at this moment. What do I taste right now, and what do I feel? And when you do that, you realize, God isn't just up in the sky, or somewhere else, but God is in this world.
Yep.
And so for me, that's a huge part of it, of those last 2 blocks, really saying, how do I see God? How do I smell, God's creation? How do I feel this? And it's a really grounding practice. The other thing that I do is at the end of the day, I spend some time just journaling how I spent my time. And so I'll say, this is how many hours I worked. This is how many hours I played. Here's where I connected with folks. Then at the end of the week to say, is this in line with my values?
Yeah.
Is this what I'm doing?
Yeah.
So if I realize, man, I've worked a lot, but I haven't connected with family or friends, then I'm able to kind of adjust course for the following week. So those are 2 things.
Yeah, so people will use the word work-life balance. I think that's kind of impossible these days. But instead, if you look back over your life for a week or a month, that you can say, is there work-life harmony? Am I finding rhythms where my values, what I value and I say I value, I'm actually putting at the top, and that's making its way to the top of my list, or making space for those things. In our tradition, we believe in what we call the priesthood or the ministry of everybody. And so it's not just pastors who are spiritual leaders. We all are, and we're all filled with the Holy Ghost. We'll celebrate that at Pentecost later. And so what we'd love for you to do now is, within the sanctuary, if you can turn safely and talk to folks, and on Zoom, we're going to have you just get into groups here. And we'd love for you just to share, did you sense a time when God was really saying, it's time for you to step away with me and examine what's in your cupboard? Maybe you're trying to do things you're not supposed to, or whatever. Was there a season like that where you felt like God was speaking to you? And if so, how? And what was the result of that? So let's turn and talk about our practice of Sabbath, or not taking Sabbath, and be back in about 7 minutes. Thank you, Kristin.
Thank you.